let me introduce my guests, and then we get to the issues that we have tabled for discussion this morning. And my guests are Kwame Jantwa. He's Chairman of the PIAC, Public Interest and Accountability Committee, and member of COSECA. And COSECA has also been at the forefront of this ECG concessionaire matters. We'll get to find out what he thinks about the current developments. John Abdullahi Jinapo is MP, Yape Kusogu, and former Deputy Power Minister. Also in the studio is Abdul Malik Bako, Editor-in-Chief of the New Crusading Guide newspaper. The man who is presently on his knees and pleading for some clemency for the media. What happened to the law? Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to Newsfile.
Good morning. Good morning.
Simon. Right. Okay, so we'll get to the issue right away, and we're dealing first with the NMC's, very sweeping, sanctions that have come in and gotten people crying all over the place and shouting that the NMC is doing something wrong. We'll find out if indeed they are doing something wrong. Now, John, maybe I should start with you, because your party issued, is it really the party or members within your party have commented, and you have said that what is happening amounts to monetization of the airspace or monetization of the freedom of speech, including that of the media. This is because the NCA has or intends to fully implement its laws as regards stations that have defaulted one way or the other, and we'll get into the details of all of that. What exactly are your concerns?
Well, thank you very much, Samson, and good morning to viewers and listeners. Yesterday was quite a terrible one after the rains, and so we've had to be moving up and down.
Were you affected by the rain as well?
No, some family members.
Okay.
And so we needed to do some movements here and there, so I thought I was going to be late. First of all, I think that it's important to underscore one fact, that as a country, we all ought to respect the law. Nobody is against enforcing the law. You are a lawyer. I do recall as a student, when I was doing commercial law, the lecturer made mention of some particular instance where if a judge was to give a ruling and say that all of us should walk on one leg, it's virtually impossible and virtually impractical. And so even as judges, regulators, and all the other state institutions seeks to enforce the law, they ought to do that within reasonable limits, within acceptable limits. And so it's only proper that the NCA is beginning to enforce the law. And I think it's commendable that we all ensure that we abide by the laws, we stick by our laws, and do what is proper and what is right. The police service, all the other state institutions ought to be encouraged to do what is right. But we should also acknowledge the fact that we do not operate in isolation, that society is interrelated and interdependent, and that in whatever actions we are taking, we ought to look at where we were, where we are, and where we intend going to. And yesterday, I listened attentively to, I think, your news night in the evening, Friday evening. I think it's
Ghana
called
Connect.
Yes, Ghana Connect. And I followed the discussion, and I found that very intriguing because a lot of revelations came up. There was a particular FM station owner, I think Oxy FM or something. Yes. And he said that he had written to NCA 2 years ago or so, attempting to renew the license. And that the NCA wrote back that the owner would hear from them in due course. Then another one said that when he contacted NCA, because he was a bit confused as to even how to go about the renewal. NCA said that the same process you went through, the same requirements for granting of the license, you would require those same procedures in terms of renewal. And something struck me. What came to light was that if you wanted a license, you needed to do a feasibility study first of all and submit it. And so if I want the renewal of that license, do I need to do another feasibility study? I thought the feasibility study is done when you want to venture into a project in order to determine how viable that project is. And so for me, there appeared to be a gap in communication between the NCA and operators of these radio stations. And I think that it ought to be clarified. Because I do know that following the issues about microfinance companies, the Bank of Ghana established a unit specifically meant for microfinance. And they interact with the microfinance companies on a month-to-month basis, explaining issues, holding seminars for them. And so if one day, after so many years, the NCA is not implemented these rules, and so you find out that there's a gap or a lag, and you find about 131 FM stations falling in that, and you decide to undertake such harsh draconian measures, I find that quite disturbing. Because, Samson, to find an FM station 61 million cedis, let's be frank with ourselves. In as much as we encourage the MCA to do what is proper and what is right, it's just not practical. It's not possible that an FM station, given the current economic circumstance, would be able to pay 61 million Ghana cedi, and I'm told within a month or so. It cannot happen. And so in as much as you want people to do what is right, don't let it appear as if it's an attempt to kill the fly with a sledgehammer. I'm happy that GIBA is taking it up.
Do you understand the processes leading to the fines?
I don't.
Is it an arbitrary fixing of fines?
I don't have the facts.
Against which entity? No, you should, because the NCA issued a very, about 30 pages.
I've read the entire
yeah, so if you have
pages.
read, then you would know that it is not as if the NCA got up today and said, we decide that you pay this amount. You too, we decide that you pay this other amount. But it is your period of default that determines how much you pay, and which has also been circumscribed by law.
I have the Act here,
yes.
Act 755. I have read the Act. The Act says that 3 months before expiration, you ought to apply for renewal.
Right.
I'm saying that 3 months after expiration, I was expecting that the NCA would have taken that step and not wait for all these years and then begin to compound it and slap 61 million on an FM station. It ought to be reasonable. Let's be frank with ourselves. That 61 million, you are virtually collapsing that FM station. And that's why I said I'm happy that GIBA, Kwakuba Okon, and a whole lot of others have said that yes, whilst it is good to enforce the law, let us do so within a framework where it will not be seen as if we are killing these FM stations, because we also need them. And also, let us engage further. The NCA should not be seen as an entity that sits and over a period is not enforce the law and all of a sudden decides to enforce the law in such a harsh manner. I think that we ought to be engaging. I equally find it disturbing, the statement from the Honorable Minister, because the law says that if the NCA takes action and you are not happy with that, you have the opportunity to appeal to the minister. And I would read that in due course. A person aggrieved by the refusal of the authority to grant or renew his license under this act, or by the modification, suspension, cancellation of a license granted under this act, may in writing appeal to the minister, who shall within 30 days of receipt of the appeal make a decision thereof. I thought that the minister would have stayed off this controversy based on this, so that if I feel that, look, I probably wrote to NCA, NCA responded to me, I'm not happy with the way they went about it, I'm not even happy with the fine, there will be an avenue for me to apply to the minister. But if the minister says that right-thinking Ghanaians will not make contrary comments about the decision of the NCA, it will then appear that already the minister finds nothing wrong with what has happened, she endorses it. And so if I'm an owner and I have an arbiter or a judge who is already compromised, how do I apply to that person? And so the short and long of all this discussion, in my opinion, is that let us sit down, let us engage, let us look at the fines again and find out if we can have a win-win situation where the FM stations and all the other stations, TV stations, they comply with the law. Let's apply the law when it ought to be done,
okay,
but not in such a draconian
For the benefit
manner.
of those who may not have read the statement or seen anything about the statement, it is only fair. I'm going to read just the first 2 pages of it, because the first 2 pages, there are very essential things that can assist you to properly, as it were, independently assess the situation, whether or not something is being done wrong or not. And this statement was issued in Accra on the 28th of September 2017. The National Communications Authority, NCA, has sanctioned a total of 131 FM's authorization holders. In fact, they are careful about calling them licenses. There's a constitutional question about that. So always, when it comes to media, they say authorization. Authorization holders found to have committed various infractions pertaining to their authorizations to operate as contained in Section 13 of the Electronics Communications Act 2009, Act 775. A further 13 FM authorization holders have been issued with reprieves as pertains to their authorization. This follows the completion of a nationwide FM spectrum audit conducted this year to determine compliance of authorization holders with their authorization conditions and to determine which FM stations were in operation or otherwise. The FM spectrum audit also forms part of a wider and ongoing audit of all services regulated by the NCA, including TV and ISP services. Section 13 of the Electronics Communications Act states, among others, that, quote, the authority may suspend or revoke a license or a frequency authorization where A, the license or the authorization holder has failed to comply materially with any of the provisions of this act, regulations, or the terms and conditions of its license or frequency authorization. B, the licensee or the authorization holder has failed to comply materially with a lawful direction of the authority. C, the licensee or the authorization holder is in default of payment of a fee or other money charged or imposed in furtherance of this act, the National Communications Authority Act. D, the licensee ceases to 1. Operate the public communications network. 2. Provide the public electronic communication service. Or 3. Use the frequency band. The breakdown of the number of stations and the sanctions being applied to them are as follows. Revocations. 21 FM broadcasting stations have had their authorizations revoked completely. That's 21. They have had their authorizations revoked completely since their authorizations had expired over several years and were operating illegally. They had also failed to apply for renewal 3 months before expiry of existing authorization and, as stipulated in their authorization, the FM broadcasting stations in question also did not respond to, we need to know that, respond to a notice the NCA sent to them to regularize their operations earlier this year. So that's the first group, revoked completely. Second group, 13 FM broadcasting stations will also have their authorizations revoked completely since their authorizations had expired and were operating illegally. They had also failed to apply for renewal 3 months before expiry of existing authorization as stipulated in their authorization. This section of FM broadcasting stations responded to the notice but had requested for extension of time to regularize their operations, with which the NCA found unacceptable and declined. Penalties. The sanctions below responded to, the stations below responded to an earlier notice requesting them to regularize their operations. However, they have been fined as per the category of infractions and pursuant to the NCA's gazetted schedule of penalties. The fines range from 50,000 Ghana cedis to 61 million, depending on the infraction and the duration the infraction persisted. 11 radio stations have been requested to pay application fees for renewal of authorization and to pay a fine in accordance with the NCA's gazetted schedule of penalties for failure to apply 3 months before expiry of the authorization within 30 days. 2 radio stations have been asked to submit renewal application within 30 days. 16 radio stations have been asked to submit renewal application, pay application fees, and pay a fine in accordance with the authority's gazetted schedule of penalties within 30 days. 24 radio stations have been asked to submit omitted documents and pay a fine in accordance with the authority's gazetted schedule of penalties within 30 days. 15 radio stations will have their authorizations processed after payment of fines in accordance with the authority's gazetted schedule of penalties. 1 radio station has been asked to settle its outstanding indebtedness before renewal of authorization is considered. The last 2. 20 radio stations have been asked to settle their provisional authorization, that's renewal fees, which have been invalidated due to non-payment within 60 days, to pay interest on due amounts. And finally, 8 radio stations have been asked to pay a fine in accordance with the NCA's Gazette schedule of penalties before the authority conducts inspection as required by the requested by the stations. I won't read any further. I've read almost up to page, a bit of page 4, up to page 4. Yes, John. So with the benefit of all of this, you still insist that they have an approach which is wrong and that you expected them to take what approach?
What I'm saying is that the NCA ought to have been proactive right from the beginning. It's obvious that the NCA is allowed this to fester for a couple of years. That's a fact.
Okay.
And I'm saying that based on the law says that 3 months before the expiration, you ought to apply and go through the process. If you don't, you cease to operate or the NCA takes action. And so the NCA should have taken action at that time. And so if you wait and sleep on your rights, sleep on implementing the law, and wait for, say, 5 years, 6 years, and all of a sudden you compound that and slap a fine of 61 million cedi, which is about 610 billion old Ghana cedi, I find that quite problematic.
Okay, you said you were listening to Ghana Connect yesterday, and you heard the NCA official.
Yes.
Okay, did you hear the NCA official say that it does not appear that the authority had been sleeping as is being suggested, because they adopted a soft approach? So they contacted some of them. They were trying to assist some of them through the process to be able to regularize their, situation. But this is where it has gotten to, and they have to just crack the whip. What do you say to that?
Can you imagine we had a scenario where the police administration decides that Monday they round up 3,000 motor riders without helmets and haul all of them to the courts and seek to jail them? It will create chaos. So I'm saying that in implementing the law, if
that's a question to me, I'll say I wish they did that.
Well,
because if you are breaking the law by not wearing your helmet, and in fact the state is intended in protecting you by insisting you wear your helmet,
That's a different.
You should be rounded up
if
and
the
taken to
state
court.
insists you wear your helmet, that's a different. If the state goes to round up 5,000 people, take all of them to court, seek judgment against them, and take all the 5,000 to Sawan prison, I'm sure that something we are going to say no, no. Whilst we agree and admit that you are implementing the law, you could have done it with some human face. No one is saying that the NCA should not implement the law. All we are saying is that we find the approach quite draconian. We find the approach harsh. Can't we sit around the table and find a common ground and still go around implementing the law?
Specifically, what's the common ground for you, for those whose licenses have been revoked, for the fact that they were found to be operating illegally and had not regularized, even upon being asked to do so? What do you say should be done?
I would wish that a grace period is given. Given the enormity now, given the fact that all of us now underscore the fact that, look, the NCA is determined to implement the law, I would wish that a grace period is given. I would also wish
when
that
you say grace period, you're talking about a moratorium?
A moratorium. Okay. That's the right terminology, a moratorium. Two is that I would wish that even if you were to fine them, not such hefty fines. And the gentleman said that even if he were to work for 10 years, he cannot pay that amount. That if he were to sell all the assets of the FM station, everything, he cannot pay that amount. And let's be frank, Samson, the amount is a hefty amount, irrespective of the challenge, irrespective of the issues. If you tell an FM station to pay 61 million within that stipulated period, it creates a big problem. And so I would encourage the minister in particular to intervene as minister and lead this process, engage all the various stakeholders, engage GIBA.
You mean the minister under whom the NCA, who has responsibility for the NCA?
Yes.
That is Eslawusu.
Yes.
Okay.
Because the NCA Act itself says that when something happens and you are not happy with it and you are not satisfied, you have the liberty to at least apply to the minister. And that's why I said I found it troubling when I heard the minister taking sides, even when she had not been petitioned. I thought that she should have remained a bit neutral, allow NCA to do its work, allow whatever petitions that exist, whatever issues that exist, come to her table, and then in an independent manner, she could assemble all the various stakeholders.
Does it not sound to you that where we are, they had gone beyond the period of petitions? Because if you have not renewed for, say, how many years, then you have no right of going to petition about anything. Or
don't be surprised that even if you were to give this moratorium, some of the stations will not qualify. Because my understanding is that some of them have taken this so-called authorization instead of using the term license and have not been operating. Some have acquired a spectrum. Or
and the law is
whatever.
Specific that if you pick it within a
beyond
certain
2
period,
years, if you haven't used it, they may write to you and give a notice of about 60
Okay.
days and handover and all that. And so, yes, it's good to clean the system. It's good to ensure that we do the right thing. You see, we are talking of the spectrum or the frequency now. We are not even discussing the content.
Right.
And I was happy you brought all these issues so that even beyond the frequency, beyond the license to operate, we could also be looking at the content. And so it's something that I would add my voice to discerning voices, to discerning minds, to all those who are calling on the NCA and the government. And you see, nobody is pushing that we do what is improper and what is wrong. But what we are saying is that even within what is right, because these are fines determined by the NCA itself. And I'm sure that the NCA has the liberty and has the space to tinker around this and find a common ground for all of us to proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's hear from Mr. Jantua, but before that, it escaped me. I wanted to do a special birthday wish to the Vice President, His Excellency Dr. Mahmoud Bamia. Never seen a Vice President who works in the manner he goes about, how he does his job. Yes, still keeping the spirit of the campaign where he was everywhere doing work at the presidency. Yes, he has problems with what I have said, but that's what I want to say, and I've just said it as I want. He has problems with it. I don't know. Yes, go ahead, please. We're talking about the NCA.
Good morning to my
Good
fellow
morning.
panelists. Good morning to listeners and viewers of Newsfile. Samson, ignorance of the law is no defense, number one. At the time that these radio stations were applying for the license and they got the license, were they not aware of the laws that governed the industry? Were they not aware? It looks as if we are shifting the responsibility on NCA. The responsibility too is with the radio stations. At the time you are supposed to pay your license, you have to pay your license on due date. So, what about those radio stations who have paid their licenses? Did they not know that because of the law they are supposed to abide by it? And the NCA, unfortunately, have waited, and I also listened to the program. The lady said it's not 17 years. But from what we hear, they have waited for, okay, let's put the 17 years. They've waited for a long duration of time to act. Why so? Why have they been sleeping on the job? And these radio stations, if they cannot pay, do they not run adverts on their shows? Do they not earn income from it?
Not all of them. Some of them find themselves in environments that they don't get TV adverts to run.
Okay, so let's look at it on two fronts. Those that run adverts.
Right.
Are you saying that they are not making enough money to be able to pay?
And there are those you can see who make quite a good
yes, it's
good
not
amount
a question of even 61 million. So you have brought, let me make an analogy. You have brought goods into the port. They have given you the duty you are supposed to pay. You haven't been able to pay for a while, and they slap you with a fine for keeping your goods there and not being able to pay. What happens? They either sell your goods, and even if they sell your goods and the money that they have been able to get is not enough, they still come after you, don't they? Do they just leave you? No, they don't. And so equally, where these radio stations are concerned, they are responsible to make sure that they abide by the law. Look, the one thing that really gets to me is that we have parliament, don't we? And we have parliamentarians who make the laws. And we have parliamentarians who should make sure that the laws that are made are implemented and people abide by the laws. When such things happen, the same parliamentarians you hear, oh, let's give them chance, let's give them this, let's give them... It is because we flout laws and we don't seem to want to abide by the laws. That's why our country is where it is today. Go to other jurisdictions that we try to compare ourselves with. They are what they are because the laws work. If my brother goes to London today, and he parks his car at a parking meter, and he slots money into the parking meter, and the money expires and his car is still there, what happens?
They won't wait for 17 years. They will immediately check.
Exactly.
So that's the point.
They won't wait for 17 years. Why are we waiting for 70 years in Ghana? Why are we waiting for 17 years in Ghana? Why can't we abide by the laws in Ghana? And why is it that when such situations happen, we are all running to say, oh, have mercy, have mercy, have mercy? I don't think we should even put our mouth in it. Law is law. Law is law, yes. My comrade...
So you are saying law is law. So the one who is enforcing the law also ought to be seen to be respecting the law.
Exactly, and I'm saying the same thing.
So what should happen? So, that's what we are looking at now.
The fact that they have been forced, they haven't enforced the law doesn't mean that now that they want to enforce it, they can't enforce it. Now that they want to enforce it, they can't enforce it because they have done an infraction. And anyway, Isn't it a new government?
In law, they say that equity. In law, they say that equity. If you want to do equity,
Yes.
equity does not.
Yes.
Equity does not help the one who went to sleep.
Yes, it does not help the one who went to sleep. But laws have been breached. Laws have been breached. Is it not so? All this long brofu you read, wasn't it law? Weren't you trying to establish what the law is and situate the situation in the law? Wasn't that what you were trying to do? And so why are we jumping? Why are we saying, oh, have mercy? Why are we saying, yes, I do agree. Perhaps, for me, what they should sit around the table to discuss is the quantum of the fine. That is what they should sit around. But it's not fair on those who have paid. It is not fair on those. Is Joy FM part of the list? Joy FM is not part of the list. So it means you have paid. There are other radio stations that aren't part of the list. It means they have paid. And you see, the moment you start putting a precedence in place, next time round, you are forced to follow it when it happens.
So please, just a bit of, you see, you raise a critical point to support John on how long, they have allowed, the laws to be breached. I want you to zero in on how to solve that situation first, because those who have been affected are saying, some of them have been heard saying, then you cannot come and attack us now if you have allowed all of this to go. And that's why I was trying to use the equity principle, that, if you have slumbered, if you have been indolent, if you have not been vigilant, the law says equity will not help you. Yes. So if you are going to do equity, make sure that you do your job well.
Yes. So you're trying to say that if for nothing at all, because they have failed their bit, they should find a middle ground to sort it out.
Like John suggested, a moratorium, let's say from this time going. Okay. So we could forgive all your sins. That's my understanding.
And we've been forgiving all the sins in most of the things we do in this country, where law is concerned. You say, oh, let's forgive all the sins. We need to be able to establish some precedents and make sure that laws are implemented and laws are stuck by. Yes, in terms of the money aspect, the quantum is heavy. So for me, based on the financial bit, let's sit around the table. But I still feel that who oversees NCA, the regulator?
No, I don't hear the regulator.
Yeah, they are the regulator, but there must be somebody overseas.
The ministry that
So if anything at all, it's up to the supervising minister to also sanction NCA for sitting and not doing their work. But the general public should know laws work. For me, that is the critical bit. If it so happened that we were a country that abided by laws, yes, I would sit around the table. But we don't. A motorcycle gets to a traffic light, bam, pushes off. It rained yesterday. You know what was happening? People took their excreta and poured it in the rain for it to... I mean, what kind of... it's very difficult. And so for me, where you have an opportunity to establish the law, establish it irrespective. Let's sit around the table and talk the money issues. Let's sanction NCA for sitting for 70 years. And anyway, John, in your government, why did you sit for all this time and not do what you were supposed to do by law? Why? Including the ex-MPP government when they were in power. Because all this has started from 2009 or way back then. We've all been sleeping. We've all been sleeping. And I don't see why NCA should prompt a radio station to pay their fees when time is due. Yes, probably you send them a letter, but they should abide by it. They should abide by it. And people, I hear people saying that, oh, it is burden on freedom of speech and all that. Freedom of speech is costly, isn't it? Freedom of speech means responsibility, isn't it? You need to be able to be responsible to enjoy freedom of speech. And for me, these radio stations have done a disservice to their listeners.
Okay, we'll come to that other aspect because it's most important part to raise about the Constitution, which says that you should not require a license for the operation of these businesses, these entities. You should not require a license. And as you know, if you remember the Radio Eye cases, which has brought some light, two high courts. One says, yes, you are right. Another high court says, you are wrong. And then where did we end?
Sammy, just before Comrade Kweku comes in, the spectrum is a finite product. It's a finite product. It's like an oil block. It's a finite product.
That's the point.
At the present moment, within the oil industry, there are companies who have been given oil blocks and haven't even paid their surface rental. And so, if you have radio stations not abiding by it, are they not stealing? Are they not? Are they not using the resource of the spectrum unlawfully? The same way, if an oil company comes in, they are not paying their service rental and they are taking out oil, is that not a breach of their contract?
Okay. And also in terms that the country can have only a certain number of these, and if you have it and you are not using it, or you are breaching it,
give it up.
It should be taken away and given to someone else, because there are no more to be given to anybody. I see.
That's what makes it finite.
Interesting. Now, before Kweku comes in, where I stopped, I'd like to read just a couple of paragraphs again, because it's important to put the issues in perspective. Now, they said that aside the above, the NCA has also granted one radio station an extension to set up. 2 radio stations have been authorized to commence test transmission. A further 3 have been asked to submit renewal application within 90 days, with 7 radio stations having their provisional authorization and final authorization issued. Affected stations have also been given 30 days to settle their indebtedness or submit the relevant documentations as indicated in the letters sent to them by the NCA. The actions of the affected radio stations go against the authorizations issued them before commencement of work. The validity period of the authorizations are for a 5-year period, effective from the date of the authorization, and renewable 3 months prior to its expiration through any of the 8 offices of the NCA nationwide. It is important to note, however, that some of the FM broadcasting stations have never attempted to renew their authorization, some for as long as 17 years. This has resulted in the stations depriving the state of statutory revenue. This is a situation which the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament of Ghana found unacceptable, and for which the NCA was invited to explain its actions before the committee earlier on this year. Much as the NCA recognizes the key role the radio stations play in the socio-economic life of the country, dissemination of information, employment and investment opportunities it creates, it is important that players within that space adhere to the regulatory requirements and conditions of their authorizations. Ghana's spectrum, just like any other country's, is finite, and it is important that the country maximizes the benefits of the spectrum and to also ensure that those who are giving a piece of the spectrum use it judiciously for the benefit of society and the state. The authority wishes to assure the public that it will play its regulatory role as contained in the NCA Act and the Electronics Communication Act, among others, to sanitize the industry and ensure that players adhere to the rules pertaining to their various licenses and authorizations. Right. What do you have to say about all of this? I've heard you already, and I've just heard you pleading all over the place.
Well, I have to confess that I'm confronted with a certain moral dilemma. My comrade Jantua, we go back a long time. He said, the law is the law. It's true. The law is the law. And Comrade Jantua, I had this same refrain in 1994. The host has indicated we might deal with certain issues. It may take us back there. But I had it. The law is the law. When Dr. Reku Brobe, Victor Newman, and others decided after so many attempts to apply the law, that is, apply for the frequency, had failed, they decided to launch the Radio Eye. And we were told loud and clear that the law was the law. And they quoted all the relevant provisions of the law then. The frequency registration and broadcasting control law, the SMC this, SMC that. And in the process, closed down Radio Eye. We went on a demonstration and we were confronted by another group of demonstrators whose leaders were masked. And they beat us, they beat the hell out of us. We were going to Parliament House to present a resolution. Mr. Kufuor lost his watch then. He had to run like Usain Bolt. I'm telling you, President Kufuor, Nana Akufo-Addo Dema were part of that thing. And it was the law that we were told we had violated. And indeed, 5 gentlemen, including Brobe, Imprim, and Freeman, and some 3 Ghanaians, 2 British, were prosecuted at the courts. So yes, there was a law. The legal regime then, on the face of it, really did not support what the Radio Eye had done in strict law. But the effect of the Radio Eye thing was that it opened the floodgates eventually. Indeed, my own very good friend or brother, Mr. Tutubi Kwachi, who was then the Minister of Information, went to Parliament 2 days after Radio Eye had begun. No, I think a few weeks after. Radio Eye began 19th November 1994, covered broadcasting. But Mr. Tutubi went to Parliament House on this 4th of December 1994, and he said that what this whole private broadcasting thing, allowing it was like opening the Pandora box. We went through a lot. We've come a long way, let me be honest. A lot of changes have taken place. Many radio stations have come. More liberalization, in my candid opinion, has, come into the system. So we're not exactly back to that period, I have to be honest. But I still hear today that the law is the law. And I agree. When I read the NCA statement, I hadn't read it until Tuesday night, so I began to comment on this matter from Wednesday. I agree. If you look at the law and you look at the regulations, then the radio stations that have been affected really operated with impunity. There's no doubt about that. They violated the law. I wouldn't sit here and pretend there was no violation of the law. A certain lack of discipline, certain lack of adherence to simple regulations. I wouldn't do that. And that is why I said I'm confronted by a certain moral dilemma. And that is the only reason why my prescription amounted to pleading for mercy. When it comes to the media...
You can just settle that small bit before you proceed. You're pleading for mercy. Is it an amnesty?
Yes.
Let's say everybody's sins forgiven.
Yes.
It's from today that we can now sanction you if you err.
I said so.
Okay.
I said so. And that's exactly what I mean. It's driven by mere and pure sentimentalism. It's not a substitute for the law.
And this amnesty should go for all.
Yes. Yes. That's the point. That's the point I'm making. I've heard people bring in all sorts of analogies to tell me that There's a call for impunity or greater impunity. That is what I'm calling for. I'm saying that when it comes to the media and the history of the media and the way we have fought progressively to expand the frontiers of free expression, and I tell you, electronic media is virtually now in the lead. They have done much justice to this whole environment. The fact that the NCA itself slept on its job and these media houses also operated with impunity calls for a certain balancing act. I think that we should start afresh. You see, I looked at some of the fines. There are different categories. Those whose licenses have been revoked, give them another chance. These licenses that have been revoked are available for others to go for anyway. Huh? And they?
Yes, they are.
Yes. So sooner than later, we see some people would have gone for those licenses. And then somebody would wonder, were you creating the room for alternative owners? I don't think so. I'm only speculating. It may be coming with some mischief. That's not what I mean.
That's mischief.
That's not what I mean. But it is open to that kind of speculation, even if it's mischievous. So why don't we create conditions that would disable this kind of mischievous speculation or speculators? I'm not talking law, and I know. I've checked a lot of people who like what I say. 9 out of 10 are against what I'm saying. I'm telling you, serious minds, very well-informed people, experienced. They are all saying I'm wrong. I said, well, I want to be wrong on this call. Because I've seen the way the state, not just governments, and I don't see government in this. Again, let me be honest with you. That is, I don't see a political agenda. I don't see it. Those who make that argument are not helping our cause. But it's the state, an arm of the state, the National Communications Authority, suddenly has woken up and has decided that it will go by the book. I'm saying that we should bring in some compassion. So to be honest with you, I checked the fines. My goodness, 61 million Ghana cedis. That particular station is gone, dead and buried. It's gone. There's no way that station, and there are many more, can pay $61 million, even if you give him cedis, I'm sorry, a period. So really, you are telling the station that you have gone with the winds. I'm calling for amnesty because I think that we're in a special category when it comes to the media. Well, after all, businessmen and others get into trouble, they mitigate. They go through all sorts of, when you don't file you don't pay your tax, you evade tax, and it's not like you are given some chance to pay a period. Somebody says we should do the same for. If you are not going to give them comprehensive amnesty, then find means of mitigating so as to keep them in business. I don't know. I'm not talking law, so I know by now I'm getting a lot of flack. But to be honest with you, the little history and experience I've had with the media.
But what other people are asking people like you is, when you mention the quantum of the fine, you fail to mention that it is the length of your default.
Yeah.
Because the default is daily. And I have asked the question, what is the purpose of the sanction? So that you don't get into it after all. The purpose of the fines is that we are putting this down so that it will deter you, it will put you on your guard. You won't get to that area because if you get there, you know you pay more. So avoid getting there. So all those who have complied, they have avoided getting into the sanction zone. So they don't have a dime to pay.
May I ask, is it true that it's 10,000 cedis a day?
We understand so.
My goodness. How? Were they from Mars? Those who did that, put that ceiling there, they from Mars? Look, it's insanity. I'm not talking about NCA. Right. Those who did the law, those who put that thing there.
NCA was involved.
Yes, but at the end of the day, they didn't pass the law. It's insanity, lunacy of the highest order. We should scrap that quickly. Now we must go back to the law, the lawmakers, the lawmaking body, those who make those regulations. We should go back there, check some of these things. It should be reasonable, knowing the level of the economy, the state of the economy, the things that we generate, revenue here and there. Look at all those things. Lawmaking must come with some common sense as well as the economic reality driving it. Lawmaking. You should not look just at the punitive aspect of lawmaking, just the punishment of sanction, and say that, look, I'm going to hike the punitive thing so that I can preempt or prevent certain mischief.
Okay.
That's not how you make laws. It should be reasonable. It should be realistic.
Okay, John, just hold on, and Kweku, hold on briefly. Let's go to the phone lines and speak to Mr. George Anda, who is the Member of Parliament, Utu Senya West, and Deputy Communications Minister. Thank you very much for joining us, George.
Good morning, Samson, and good morning to your panelists. Good morning to your viewers and your listeners. Let me first wish His Excellency Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, Alhaji Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, a very, very happy birthday, and all those that are celebrating their birthdays today with him. I know lawyer Hospado as well is celebrating his birthday. I've been monitoring the interaction, and I think that to a large extent, some solid points have been made. Let me just establish the fact that we all agree that the National Communications Authority, NCA, is empowered by the NCA Act of 2008 and by the Electronic Communication Act of 2008 to regulate frequency, the usage of frequency in Ghana.
Yes, there's no debate about that.
And the issue, the narration that Bombay gave about the Radio I incident.
And when you say Bombay, you are referring to Kweku Bako?
Sorry, Kweku Bako gave.
Okay.
We are all aware that there was a determination by the Supreme Court of Ghana on this matter that stated that in as much as there's no requirement for licenses to be issued for radio stations to operate, there's a requirement for regulation, and that is why the NCA does the authorization based on the usage of frequencies, which I've heard my big brother Joshua talk about it, and the fact that the use of spectrum is a finite resource. Now, there's also this position that the NCA has been, in quote, sleeping. I'm sure that we are all aware that there is institutional memory within the NCA. And indeed, within the current board of the NCA is a former Director General. And so the NCA Director General and board and management know what they are doing. And they have stated clearly that in the past, their position has been the soft approach, where it's like, let us engage more, let us give them a bit more time, let us try and see what will happen next. Okay, so that approach, we have gone that route, and we haven't achieved the results that is expected. Now, I'm a bit surprised at the position of some of the members of the minority. And something, you will recall that this year, the National Communications Authority was summoned before the Public Accounts Committee. Indeed, the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee is the deputy leader of the minority in Parliament. And the Public Accounts Committee was very clear of their state of unhappiness with the NCA because they were of the view that NCA was not regulating and managing spectrum use properly. It's a fact. Okay. So if this is the position that, as far as accountability is concerned, this route act is read to the NCA. And the NCA in March publishes in the newspapers that they are going to conduct a radio spectrum audit across all radio stations. And they write to them. Okay, they carry out this audit. Some of the radio stations that were infringing quickly rectified their issues with the NCA. Some of them refused to register to reconcile and to fix the issues with the NCA. So I am not sure why the impression is being created that the NCA is being draconian and is being a bit difficult. Now, something you made a point that I was going to make, but just to let you know that I'm fully aligned with you on that point. The mindset of the framers of these penalties was more for encouraging people to pay. So you pay your $2,000 a year, $3,000 a year for authorization based on the type of operation that you're going to do, whether it's community education, whether it's a social service, whether it's a commercial station. There are different categories. So you pay this token amount for the utilization of that spectrum. In the unlikely event that you decide not to be a responsible citizen or responsible entity, okay, then you pay a heavy fine. So look at it from two sides. There's a soft approach to motivate you to pay, and there's a hard approach to punish you for not being compliant. And I don't see why this should be a problem. Okay?
Now, can we clarify a few things? You have
just a minute, just a minute, please.
Okay.
If I may just wrap up.
Okay.
You see, Kweku Boakye has been making some statement. I believe that if radio stations have ears, they'll hear. Okay, you have breached the law. Sanctions have been applied on you. Make an effort to engage with the NCA. Okay, let the NCA management and board take a decision. But you don't sit down and go on radio stations and start talking as if your matter is sweet. Okay, and then you expect that the NCA or the minister will come and reverse those sanctions. The honors of a reconciliation or Kweku Boakye used a word, I can't remember what word to use. Or amnesty. Amnesty doesn't lie on the ministry, it doesn't lie on the board. Okay, if you make an effort, the board can then decide based on the information that they have available to them, okay, whether they should reverse or whether they should sustain.
Okay.
Okay, and in all fairness, I believe that is the way to go.
Right.
Of the 34 radio stations that have had their licenses revoked, 7 of them are still on air. Okay, now do you think that whilst you're on air, you expect the minister to reverse the sanctions that have been hit on you? It means that you don't respect the NCA. Now, when we talk about freedom of expression, again, this is a very, very interesting space. But I'm happy something that you read that as far as the NCA is concerned, some more licenses have been issued. Some more authorizations have been issued. Okay, and even as of now, there are still lots of applications for authorizations coming in every day. There's some reference that is being made about the NCA about the Communications Authority in Nigeria coming down on the telcos. If you allow the NCA to do what is expected of it, okay, then what's the state? Because the NCA is not going to sit down for Ghanaian resources, for the license or for the benefits that Ghanaians should enjoy.
Right.
The services that Ghanaians should enjoy to be taken away.
You just mentioned that 7 of those whose licenses authorization have been revoked are still on air. What's going to happen to them? Because they are breaching, the revocations that have been ordered.
I think the minister gave notice that we would work with the security agency to physically shut them down within the law.
Okay.
I believe that the NCA is going to issue a final warning on Monday, okay, and then after that we would go ahead and we'll do what we have to do for those
right.
patients.
What do you know? You say and you confirm what NCA officials have already said, that all the period that there's an allegation that the NCA went to sleep, they didn't go to sleep because they actually felt it was important to use a soft approach.
Well, I believe that in my in my contribution, I did mention the fact that there is institutional memory within the NCA.
Right, right.
Okay, and
So,
current member of the board of the NCA used to be a former director general as well.
right.
Okay, and
right.
that in the past, the approach had been that let us give them more time.
Correct. So here is a question about that. Now that you have decided, the NCA has decided to enforce the law in full, the period when these discussions were going on, has it been calculated also for the fines slapped on them? Because for each day that the infraction persists, you're supposed to pay 10,000. What do you know?
Something. If you look at the press release of the NCA, they are giving different categories of the sanctions or the penalties. Okay, and for each of the categories is the number is the amount. The amount payable per day of infraction times the number of days.
Right.
So for the total period of the infraction, that is what the NCA is considering.
Right. But you see, will that be fair if you are in negotiations with someone, giving the person an opportunity and a grace period, and then at a point you feel that they are not doing well, will it be fair to go to them, you know, I mean, in the manner that you suggest?
There was not a write-off of the outstanding.
Okay.
There was a grace period, an extension to pay.
All right.
Okay, so that I don't see where your point is coming in.
It's a question. You supply me the answer.
Sorry?
It's a question. It's you supply me the answer. It's not a point I'm making.
Never a write-off.
Right.
So once there wasn't a write-off, then the debt was accumulating.
Okay. You recall that recently the Registrar General, who is responsible for registering companies and regulating them, as it were, found that many companies in this country had defaulted in their renewals, their annual returns, filing. They had defaulted. You saw what they did. They gave an amnesty and gave a period within which, if you did not satisfy for this year's or last year's, you were going to be in trouble. Why don't you, as a ministry, urge the NCA to adopt a similar approach?
Captain, I think these are two separate issues. Okay? I think that you must recognize the fact that NCA has a board.
Right.
The board of the NCA is responsible for giving direction as to how the NCA should be managed.
Okay.
Okay? Now, again, in this situation, these individuals are using national spectrum, which is a resource of the nation. You understand? If I register a company, with all due respect, I'm not using. There's no financial loss to the state because I'm not using a resource. I mean, if I'm in compliance with my taxes, I'm paying my SNIT and stuff like that. Okay, but there's no financial loss to the state because I have taken over a resource and somebody else cannot take advantage of the resource for the state to make money. So there are two separate issues. However, I repeat that, and I'm sorry that I'm sounding like an old booking record. Let those who have infringed approach the NCA. Let them do what is right, and then we can cross the bridge when we get there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jojanda. Jojanda is Deputy Minister for Communications. We'll take a quick break here. We'll return to continue with that particular discussion. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis show, and we've just been joined by Kojo Opong Nkrumah, who is MP for Fuase Ayerebi, and he is also Deputy Minister of Information. Kojo, good morning and welcome to the show.
Morning, Senior.
Great.
Thank you.
So, you wanted to make this intervention before we took the break. Yes. This is your pen. Yeah.
It's quite obvious that it's taken about 17 years for the so-called softer approach. Now, if you were to do 10,000 a day, and the person breaches,
there was some guy
you apply the sanction. What it does is that it reduces the quantum of money you'd have paid if you were to wait for the 17.
He said there was not a write-off during
That's what I'm
those
saying.
discussions.
That's what I'm saying, that if the NCA, and all of us agree that the NCA should have been applying the law at that time. So if you were to apply, say, in 2009, and you say your fine based on 10 days is 10,000. If you don't pay, you cannot continue. You could choose to do that. You could also choose to wait for 17 years and slap a fine of 61 million. What happens if you were to do that is that you wouldn't have had 131 today if you had applied it at that time.
Okay.
2 is that if the person were to pay the fine wouldn't have accumulated to the 61. And so in as much as we agree with the fact that all the stations should have abided by the law and should have done what is right, it's also obvious that if the NCA had applied the law at that time, the effect we are having today would have been minimal. The last thing, the Supreme Court, you do recall, and I chose to use the Supreme Court because it's an apex court. When we were having the case between Nanado and the Electoral Commissioner, the petitioners, I remember Atuguba said, look, from today, we are drawing the red line. And that all other issues that happened, in as much as it was against the law, in the wisdom of the Supreme Court, they felt that something could be done. They could tinker with the system. And so they drew the red line. And any other person who went beyond that red line saw the impact of the state and the law. I think that Andy's position is welcoming for me and it's refreshing. Listening to him, even though he was not categorical, it would appear that he's advocating that, and based on what Kwaku is saying, there's a window of opportunity.
They should reach out individually. Right.
Let us engage each other and let's have a common ground.
But how do you reconcile his invitation for them to reach out individually with the fact that you just said this has been going on for so-called 17 years and it has not yielded any results? Why should they allow any such to
No, I'm not saying allow that. I'm saying that based on all this, if you bring all these issues to the table, 17 years, whether 10,000 is reasonable, whether those 7 FM stations should even continue to operate, even when they've been written to...
They're going to issue final
And
notice,
I said, I'm happy that GIBA is written. I think that it would be rather better for all the stations to go under the umbrella of GIBA and engage NCA and the ministry.
Right. In fact, that's what GIBA has done. The Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association has asked 8 members who have been affected to submit their concerns to them and that they would hold meetings and see what comes out of that. But for all those who are asking that the NCA, should not, enforce strict compliance of the law, have you also stopped to ask yourself, members of this country, this community, can also go to the court and take them on for not enforcing the law?
Something.
Yes.
Just before Honorable comes in, the difference between what Honorable is saying, using the Supreme Court, and today is that the radio stations knowingly breached the payment. Knowingly.
So those who made the comments didn't know when they made the comments.
They knew that was what they were supposed to do, and they didn't do it. Okay, let's take Comrade Okubako's point. Amnesty. What about those who have paid? Does that mean that those
Thank
who
you,
have paid
thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's okay. It's okay. Hold on. Let's hear from Kojo who just joined us. Thank you. Let's hear from Kojo who just joined us. So, Kojo, where do you stand, and what do you think should be the solution?
Samson, thanks for the opportunity. And let me start by saying that I'm a bit disappointed in some of our media colleagues, and I consider myself a media practitioner still, some of our media colleagues who are trying to find some new arguments to justify an obvious breach of standards that they themselves signed up to. I prefer, and I don't know if I'm allowed to call you comrade.
Why not?
I prefer.
You don't qualify to.
I prefer.
You don't qualify to call.
connection here.
No. Recently, Kwesi Pratt invited me to a program where I was allowed to call myself a comrade. So allow.
No. We'll vet it.
I prefer the approach where, you say, yes, I have breached the law. Can we do something about it? Than an approach that now begins to claim some new issues here. And I think that there must be some honesty and integrity in our discussion. First of all, the attempt to suggest that, the Supreme Court drew a red line, so let a red line come here, doesn't come in. The Supreme Court was exercising discretion on latitude that it had already. This is law. The NCA even does not have the discretion to waive these penalties. This is law. What had been happening in times past is that we have had regulators who have looked on as infractions happen in the market, only for them to sometimes turn on and join us to complain. Samson, if you look at the marketplace, there are some industries that have no regulators because it's not a big deal to operate there. There are others that have regulators, insurance, financial services. Recently, we've all been complaining about how some of the regulators have sat by and have allowed things to happen. The NCA is a regulator of spectrum. They have nothing to even do with freedom of speech. And that's why I find it strange that people want to now equate this argument to an argument of freedom of speech. NCA has spectrum. Take Joy 99.7 FM. If tomorrow somebody started transmitting on 99.7 FM, what would you do? You will run to the NCA. Why? Because you argue that they are transmitting on my frequency. How does that frequency become yours? When recently our three friends from Munti FM were taken to the Supreme Court, the court was clear that spectrum is a national asset.
Right. It's a resource.
And it is actually rented out to you to utilize. And it comes with some standards as it's been rented out to you. You have to pay your annual subscription fees. You have to ensure that you stay within the radios you have been given.
Process, it comes with higher responsibilities.
It does. You cannot take spectrum. And if you watch the letters that are awarded to people who are given spectrum, it's actually even given in the name of a specific person. And you sign up for it. And then you do not pay what you are supposed to pay for all of these years, and you say, oh, because we were talking. While you were talking, the obligation still existed. So I think it's only fair, and I'm conflicted. My heart bleeds when I hear it. I've practiced radio for close to a decade. I'm conflicted. My heart bleeds when I hear it. But let us step up to the place and say, we've made a mistake. And particularly for journalists who are supposed to be the vanguard of the conscience of the society, that we are the ones who call people to order when they are doing something wrong. When we are caught doing something wrong, I think it's only fair that we rise up and say, we have erred. Can we have a conversation? But let's not go through the back door to try and now say it has to. Freedom of speech exists. We have been trying to extend the frontiers. You would notice that when some of these licenses were revoked, there were stations who decided that they would broadcast on social media. You don't need spectrum licensing to broadcast on social media. That shows you that the freedom of speech exists, but you can use another medium to exercise it. This is a clear case of a regulator who has, may I say, decided to wake up to its responsibilities. I think we should even encourage them. And for those who are defaulting, we should ask them, instead of being a bit recalcitrant and trying to make some new arguments or even pick a fight with the NCA, I think we should encourage them to go to the NCA and see if you can get some clemency or some amnesty. But don't come into the court of public opinion trying to make some new claims when indeed you are not entitled to these claims that you are making.
Okay. I'm sure that we can terminate this discussion here. Let me read a couple of messages. Derek Lai sends in this one. He says, regulation should be fair and provide a level field for all players. When you ask the regulator to grant faulted players amnesty, what does it mean to those who are compliant?
Exactly.
Is the regulator not creating a non-competitive? Is the regulator not creating a non-competitive ground? So what are you seeking to say here? Okay, so let me move on and take another message, because your message is truncated. Ata Imoro says that it is true that NCA has the right to do what they have done, but my problem is, why have they waited till now? We need these radio stations to enhance our democratic development. Kwesi Akofu sends this from Subing in Kumasi, says, a lot of these media houses are only interested in engaging themselves in political trivialization and sentimental issues instead of focusing on the responsibilities they have as the fourth estate of the realm. The NCA has done no wrong. Benjamin Osei Jamira in Edinburgh in the UK says that, okay, I want to find out if these or those radio stations who have been blacklisted by NCA were doing business and paying salaries for the 16 years or so that they have defaulted. If so, why did they refuse to give the state what it is due? Either they pay or are out of business. Simple. Okay, so the man in the UK, in Edinburgh, sent in that one. Ni Annan, a Suman, also in London, says, per his amnesty theory, what happens to those stations who did not default, are they going to be reimbursed so they are put in equal pedestal as the defaulters, those who are compliant? Is the regulator not creating a non-competitive practice? That is Derek Lai. Okay. Okay, a new message sent in by Derek Lai. Okay. Thank you very much for all of those comments.
If you could clarify this.
Yes.
It would appear that we are mixing two things.
Which is?
First is that you were supposed to pay, say, maybe 1,000 cedi a year. For 5 years, you failed to pay that.
Right.
That is 5,000. The other one is that because you failed to pay the 5,000, some penalties have been compounded or accumulated, and maybe it's
for those who
30,000.
pay, there's no penalty outstanding.
So that is the point.
Okay.
So yes, what you should have paid in terms of the actual figures exists. Then there's another level of the penalties arising from your inability to pay.
Right.
But
so
isn't
that
the NCA charging both?
We tackle the two in that manner.
They're charging both.
It's
Okay.
important that we
Okay,
check.
I get that. I get that. But briefly, Kweku said that the amounts, the fines, he says those who, spearheaded that were engaged in, I don't want to repeat his words, that was some lunacy.
It was too harsh. I withdraw it.
Could you don't agree
I
that
respectfully
the fines
disagree
are
with you.
too hefty?
No. You
10,000 a day.
And please let me make my argument. If today somebody wants to make a new argument that maybe we should review the fines or what the law says downwards.
No, what do you say?
That's what
Should
I'm
we review
saying.
the fines or not?
No. If you just let me develop my argument. The law as was passed, I think is a good law. And I'll explain to you why. First of all, this law or these regulatory standards were approved by all of us. This thing went to Parliament, the figures were out there. They were approved by all of us. Why? They were put there as a deterrent. Remember the earlier comment I made that this is a national asset which, when rented out to you, requires you to have higher responsibility. Your utilization of that particular spectrum frequency means I can't use it, means Kweku cannot use it. And that is why we want to ensure that you comply with all the regulatory standards accorded to it.
What sort of deterrence is this? In various other laws, for each day that the infraction persists, you are paying something like 50 or 30 Ghana
You
or
have
something
been
like
given
that.
a frequency to
Are they the
utilize.
same?
And I challenge you to take your books here at Multimedia and show it to the world. You are utilizing this national asset and you are making lots of money. And you are required to pay 2,000 cedis, some cases 3,000 cedis, 7,000 cedis for a year.
In
For
the
your,
sense of that you pay 10,000 a day.
relax, for your annual subscription. This, seriously speaking, as compared to what you are doing, is almost negligible.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
The idea of the fine, as stated in the law, is to give you no excuse not to pay. It's to make it such a high
Don't put a
deterrent.
figure.
No, it's to make it
Just
such
say
a
that
high
if you fail,
deterrent.
we'll take it off.
It's to make it such a high deterrent that you do not default. Why do you default in the first place?
That's
and even if you intend to, or even if you are having challenges, the NCA has displayed with its acts over the period, and even how it has handled this one, that it is open to conversations. It is open to looking at payment plans, etc. with you. This appears to be a blatant default for a decade plus by some persons. So it is not an argument that, well, the amount was too high. The amount was so high because it was aimed at being a deterrent. Don't find yourself foul of that law. Simple.
So, so you don't agree that the fine should be reviewed?
I'm saying that if today somebody wants to make a new argument that let's go have a look at it, that person is entitled to make
Interested
that
in
argument. I will not necessarily support that view. I think that the fines as they exist in the books now.
Okay.
And again, I speak as somebody who has operated in this industry for a while. If you sort out your things well and if you make up your mind that you will comply, you can pay. And mind you, there are many others who are complying.
Exactly. Why
There are
haven't
many
they been
others who
able
are
to pay?
complying.
Right. Yes,
Well, Tom, see, the lunatic is saying redrawn, but absolutely outrageous comes to. Yes, but
Even upon the
gravity of it,
the
but
basis
both are
for
the
it,
same.
the rationale for it, that could you canvases.
yeah, but the figure is too outrageous. It
So
doesn't.
just pay the renewal.
Pay 2,000, pay 5,000, pay 7,000.
This environment, have we looked at the economics? There are few stations doing well, big stations, multimedia, despite group of companies. Yes.
If a station cannot afford 2,000 a year, should it exist?
Well, I'm talking of the 10,000. That's where my focus is.
That's when you fail to pay the 2,000.
You see, for example,
Hold it. Wait,
please.
hold it. It's Kweku is on the floor.
Yes, that's when you fail to pay the 2,000. As I said, the impunity that has come with the media owners and enterprise is clear. I'm not for one moment going to excuse them.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the sanctions angle. I think we can be a bit moderate. Because look, it's not easy. Maybe for this big empire, media empire that it is, you're making it in terms of advertisements and things. It's not easy. It's not all those stations that are making profit. Okay? Some of them don't make profit at all, but they have a certain effect on our democratic environment. Okay? So balance it. Let's be very sensitive.
Saying that there can be an excuse for not paying your 2,000. An excuse. There can be an excuse.
Something.
On the basis that you don't make enough revenue. Wait.
Yeah.
There can be that excuse by radio station that I could not pay because I couldn't afford 2,000.
Look.
Maybe not. You see, I can see why I'm in the extreme minority, a very tiny minority on this matter. When you're talking, serious minds come on board. I'm being sentimental. But what has happened now is that about 131 stations are affected.
Yes.
24 licenses have been revoked. That's not a cure for this mischief.
Kweku, do you know how much?
Okay,
that's not a cure.
Wait, you talk. Wait.
All of these
it's not all those stations. Many of them don't get
They do. I operate in the industry. I'm telling you, Kweku, listen, go outside Accra, if I may. Go outside Accra and go to what you will call the smaller radio stations operating in the district capitals, etc. And just sit down and listen to the number of advertisements that they are playing and inquire. I operate in the industry. I know. I've been here for a while.
Well,
3,000, 5,000, 7,000 Ghana cedis per annum is not impossible for these stations to pay. But I'm saying that it is because they have refused to pay that the legally prescribed sanctions have kicked in.
Okay. And you don't want to review.
Let's review. But I think we should review.
We'll get to Jantua to know if he wants a review, but quickly do that.
Don't let us reduce this renewal to 3,000. The problem is not the payment of 3,000. The problem is that beyond the 3,000, you need to satisfy a plethora of requirements.
Such as?
What they say is that the same requirements that you would require when applying for the fresh application, you require the same license, the same requirements when you are renewing.
Such as?
And so don't let us make it as if it's just a case where you wake up, go there and say that my 3,000 or my 2,000 is ready.
Name the requirements and let's examine whether or not it's impossible to meet them.
Look, sometimes they might ask for some auditing. They might ask for your professional staff. They might ask for other information. If it were just 2,000 cedi, comrade, I can assure you, most of the stations would have just walked there as if it was a tax.
Which of these stations
this is my 2,000?
He has been sanctioned because he didn't submit these ones.
In which jurisdiction would you have a situation where you say that, look, your annual license is 2,000. Failure to do so on a daily basis, you pay 10,000.
You know that, for example, VAT, when you default VAT, the penalties are compounded on a daily basis. They are aimed at being deterrents to us. Again, let me say that I myself am very pained by this. But what I'm suggesting is that let us not run into these excuse spaces. Let's rise up to the occasion and say, we have erred. We want to have a conversation about...
Would you have spoken or agreed with the manner in which they expressed their sentiments, Kweku and John, if it had affected multimedia?
My views do not change regardless of who it affects.
If you were still working with multimedia?
This is very unfair.
No.
It's so unfair.
My views, and I found myself in very interesting situations. My views are not changed based on who is affected here.
Okay.
That's like an unfair question.
Well, no, I say that, listen, all you need to do is to man up and say, I have erred.
That one is...
So what arguing about that?
That's correct. It is draconian, it is
right. Now about the review of the fines. John says we should review, Kweku says we should review, Kojo says, let's keep them that way because it is meant to deter so that you don't get into the fine zone in the first place, which I agree with, absolutely. But earlier we were talking about the community stations that don't make anything. Don't you think some of these are the reasons we should review the fines, or at least we should have categories of the fines?
Yeah. We were told that before the licenses are given, a feasibility study is sent.
Right.
That feasibility study would have your financials in there.
Right.
This thing is based on responsibility. So, you have not been able to pay. You've gotten the license, you've started operating, you're finding it difficult to pay. What do? You go to the regulator and you tell them what your problems are. The same way, the same way you go to the bank, you get a loan, and you can't pay, you go back to the bank.
Regulator says that
All right,
now,
in terms of your question, I don't think they should reduce it because it's acting as a deterrent. If we reduce it, this thing will happen again.
Should we reduce the annual fees for some of the community stations?
Maybe we should. Maybe we should. But we need to
because
do,
you know what?
We need to do an audit.
We are presently promoting a broadcasting bill, which I spoke about briefly, in which we are going to give some concentration to community radio stations.
Yes.
And the community radio stations will be under compulsion of law.
Yes.
To give some emphasis to our culture.
Yes.
They don't make money.
But
so should they be paying the same
but you see,
renewal as the commercial?
Before we even start looking at that, the NCA should monitor constantly, so that they have some locus to stand on when they want to put that in.
30 seconds.
All right.
We live in a country where we complain of budget deficits on an annual basis. The government is not meeting its revenue targets and is borrowing too much. Yet people who have obligation to pay various amounts for various things refuse to pay. And when the regulator clamps down on it, we quickly turn around and say, oh, let's find a way out. And when tomorrow government goes to stand in parliament and says that it is going to borrow, they will all come back and say, you don't go there. It is real. These are the realities of the challenges that is stretching. These are the realities of the challenges that we have. If you pay your 2,000, I'm not. If you pay your 2,000 and he pays his 5,000 and he comes to parliament to borrow again, we'll close the gap.
Okay, we've got to move on. We've got to move on. We've got to move on. And
close the station and don't come to us for a loan again.
And Esan Kuma sends me this intriguing, is it a question really? He says that we have rented out frequency rooms, quote unquote, frequency rooms on our spectrum to the radio stations. If they don't pay the rent and penalty for not paying the rent, we will evict them, go and broadcast on the internet as a squatter, which is none of our business. Go and broadcast on the internet as a squatter, which is none of our business. That's if you can't rent and you can't pay your rent, then
there's
just
an
check
alternative.
Out. Right. So we will take a break here, and when we return, we'll go to Maslock because there are questions to be answered about defaulters, including MPs who have taken loans, and some of the loans they've not paid for almost a decade. And we are also told that there's been cars that the Maslock decided to buy for the GPRTU, and it's been inflated by about 2 million. Well, there are responses coming from the former, managers of Maslock in that regard. We'll be right back.